It's October 25th. 2019 is dwindling away. I was able to score today. It's about 60 something. And I have to use some vacation days before the end of the year. That happened to me last year too. But unfortunately, I didn't know that till December. And I couldn't really use them to ride. But this year, I can. As you can see, the leaves are changing, falling. Not a lot of color this year. We got a lot of rain. I got up this morning, had some breakfast with the missus. Then I went out and strapped on my backpack leaf blower. I got this thing last year. And what a difference. I used to have one of those little handheld dudes. And that thing was like a glorified hair dryer, and it never really worked well. But the backpack, baby, woo! You can blow small animals with that thing. If I accidentally hit one of my cats, they'd end up in the next yard. Yeah, so did that, and just heading out about noontime. I'm planning to do about 100 miles today. So today's topic: do you know what to do at an accident scene? Think about that. Do you know what to do at an accident scene? Now, where'd this topic come from? Well, it started with me having, last Friday at work, I was at a refresher course for CPR first aid. I've been doing that for about 10 years. Every 2 years you have to recertify. We have an AED at our site, and I almost had to start CPR on somebody one time a couple of years ago. But otherwise, fortunately, I haven't had to use it. I've been a licensed driver. Sure, buddy, pull right out. I've been a licensed car driver for 35 years this month. And I have passed many... Ooh, trike. Looks like ZZ Top riding that thing. I've passed many accident scenes in my car, most of which there were already rescue people there, so I wouldn't have really been much use. But let's talk about the first aid thing first of all. One of the things that they emphasize is when there is an emergency or a person goes down, having a heart attack, whatever, a lot of people that don't know what to do are just kind of standing around. And they either do nothing or they do the wrong thing that can actually hurt the person. And I've seen this on videos of biker accidents as well. I was watching one a couple weeks ago where it was a group ride, a bunch of crazies, a guy went down, and people were doing things like, hey buddy, get him up, and walk it off type of thing. This guy was in basically a medical crisis, should not have been moved, and as soon as they picked him up, he passed out. And fortunately they were holding him, or he would have hurt himself going down again. But we'll get to that. So we had a couple of medics at our company doing the training, and at lunchtime I talked with them a little bit. I happened to have ridden my bike that day, and I mentioned to them that I was a rider and that I'm very concerned about safety, obviously. And there was a male and a female trainer, and the male I was talking to, right away he says that at least 50% or more of the people they load into life flight helicopters are bikers. And he said most of the time it's not them that... What is this person doing? Not them that caused the accident. It's usually someone else. And he mentioned a texting driver that crossed the line and hit a biker, and the guy had multiple amputations. And you know how it is. You tell someone a biker and they start telling you all the people they know that died. But it wasn't quite like that, but he was just very matter of fact. But he said some really interesting things that I just wanted to share. One was that the worst time of the year for biker accidents are usually holidays, like Memorial Day, 4th of July, things like that. And he said everybody's out, you know, they grab their bikes, they head out. And I told him that, you know, in our little biker world, there is the little joke, so to speak, about the garage queen, the bike that sits most of the time, but then a person, you know, jumps on it maybe just a few times a year and consequently has very low mileage, and then they end up, you know, traded in at a dealership for less than 1,000 miles, and in some cases even less than 100 miles on them. But my point in mentioning that is someone who rides so infrequently is not going to have the same skill set as somebody who rides regularly. There's just not. And the medic immediately agreed with that and pointed out that if he hasn't put an IV in someone in a few weeks, just that short time, he can tell that, you know, there's a little rust, so to speak, because he hasn't done it in a little bit. And I remember, especially after my first year of riding, there was the winter layoff, and the first time I got back on the bike in the spring, it really felt weird. So that's one issue. People who don't ride often enough, just jumping out and taking off on their bike. I know personally I do practice things like panic braking, and when I have an opportunity to do some low speed maneuvering in parking lots, things like that, U-turns. And it's good to do that. We should always be trying to improve our skills. So I then mentioned I try to keep the odds in my favor, so to speak, not only by ATGAT, wearing all the gear, but also avoiding any riding if I have alcohol in my system. I don't use drugs. I also avoid rain, night riding, things like that. And he immediately came back and said, actually, the vast majority of the accidents he deals with, you know, bike accidents, are sunshine, broad daylight, you know, and he mentioned the holidays. And so that was interesting. You would think that would be a safer time to ride, but if your skills aren't up, or just, you know, the people that are out there in cars are texting or pulling out in front of you, that's what it is. So that was a little sobering, just to keep that in mind. You know, even on a beautiful sunny day, obviously there's still risk there. So as I mentioned, I almost had to use CPR a little over a year ago on a coworker. He was unresponsive, not breathing, and if he would have just been left unattended, he most likely would have died. In the process of lifting him out of his chair and lowering him to the floor, his head tilted back, and that sort of snapped him out of it, and he did come to. But the doctors never really figured out what happened to him, and that to me was the scariest part of it. And you know, that was a challenging day. I mean, the adrenaline was pumping. I had the first aid and CPR training, but to know that you're on the verge of using it, you know, it's just, there's a lot of adrenaline flowing there. So with that in mind, and thinking about the comments about the bike accidents from the medic, coupled with some things I'd seen on YouTube of motorcycle accident scenes, it got me realizing that that's a whole nother level. You know, it's one thing if you're at work or at a gathering or at a mall or something and somebody goes into distress, that's a lot different than someone who has flown through the air, hit obstacles and landed or skidded across the pavement. And I really wouldn't know what to do. The extent of my training would be make sure the scene is safe. If he's laying in the middle of the street and there's a traffic situation, then you may have to move him or her. But otherwise, you want to keep them immobile. You don't take their helmet off, things like that. Call 911 immediately. If the person wasn't breathing, then, and it looks like death is imminent, then I suppose in that situation, you would need to remove their helmet and start CPR. But I would be concerned about what other internal injuries they have, vertebrae and stuff like that. But like I said, if death is imminent, well, what are you going to do? And I think every state in the United States has Good Samaritan laws, so that if you help someone, legitimately without negligence, you're not going to get in trouble if you accidentally hurt someone. At least that's how it's supposed to work. But there's a lot of other things, if there's massive bleeding, you may have to apply tourniquet. There's all sorts of things like that, and I have training with those things, but I don't carry a tourniquet around in my bag. I did have a spare breathing mask, which I put in my bag. But in thinking about this, I came across a website called accidentscene.org, and it's specifically for bikers. And it's not huge. It's not like you can just go down to your local town and take a class, but they do have an online class for $35, and you can follow that up with an actual hands-on thing if you can find one locally. I don't think there's anything locally for me for that, but for $35, I mean, that's, one trip to a restaurant. I think it would be good to have a little more skills. Some of the things that were mentioned are where we as bikers ride. For instance, I passed one oncoming car. I mean, there's traffic on this road, but not a lot. And sometimes we bikers like to go off the beaten path, so to speak, because we don't want to be around a lot of traffic. So if there's an accident, there may not be a lot of people around to immediately call for help. And if there are, or when you do call for help, we might be pretty far from where help is coming from. So it could be, a half an hour or more before help arrives. So being a rider, obviously I don't want to have an accident. I don't want to go down. But if I came upon a bike accident, and I have come upon a few of them, but as I mentioned at the beginning, there were already other people there that knew what they were doing, so that was good. But it is possible that I could be first on scene, or first person on scene that knows what to do and what not to do. So generally make sure the person is safe. Try not to move them if at all possible. Don't take off their helmet. Don't lift them up. Things like that. You can check for medical jewelry. You can check for any obvious, bleeds that are really out of control and need to be stopped. And, quite possibly you may need to do CPR and breathing, respiratory on somebody. So that's the topic, If you came upon a scene like that, what would you do? Would you know what to do. And if it's a scene where there's a lot of people kind of standing around and nobody really knows what they're doing, you've got to kind of take control. You know, back people up out of the way, tell people not to do things to the patient that they shouldn't do. One thing they stress in the class, don't say somebody call 911. You always see that on TV. Somebody call 911. And there's a whole bunch of people standing around and everybody's got phones. But if everybody's assuming someone else is making that call, the call might not get made. So what they stress is specifically point to someone. You call 911. You know, in the workplace, point to someone else. You go get an AED. And at a road scene, accident scene, there may be other things you need to do. You know, direct people to control traffic, things like that. So hopefully that's something to think about. If you don't know what to do, you might want to check out accidentscene.org and get a little training so that if you're ever in that situation, you will know what to do. Well, this looks fun. I hope everybody's well. Till next time.